To get an idea of what staff and patients at the Batemans Bay Hospital went through on New Year's Eve, take a look at the Rural Fire Service fire map. It shows the fire went within a few blocks of the hospital. How the hospital coped is remarkable. One account on social media tells of staff working for 24 hours to provide nourishment and hydration to all people under their roof with a friendly face, a kind heart and the absolute highest work ethics. There was also remarkable help from Moruya Hospital, but some concerns as well from Dr. Michael Holland, who's a Eurobodalla-based obstetrician and gynaecologist, and he's been spearheading the campaign for One Eurobodalla Hospital. Dr. Holland, hello.
Hello, Simon. We can't say Happy New Year, but welcome to 2020, I suppose.
Absolutely, and what a year it has been already, starting, I guess, with, before 2020, New Year's Eve. What was going on as the fire crept closer to Batemans Bay Hospital?
Well, like the whole community, I have a shared experience at that time, having been evacuated to Moruya, but I had no direct experience with Batemans Bay Hospital, but rely on the information I've received from my colleagues working there. Now, that fire front was less than a kilometre from that hospital, and at that time was staffed by one emergency specialist and two career medical officers to cope with a potential mass casualty situation.
So preparing for a pretty bad scenario where you might have what I suppose potentially been overrun by people with burns and smoke inhalation.
Well, burns, smoke inhalation, motor vehicle accidents with people with poor visibility, people falling from roofs, breaking bones, having head injuries, and the exacerbation of medical conditions that happen generally. So anything could have happened, and that hospital was isolated, separated from other healthcare services, had no effective operating theatre or intensive care, had only basic pathology and no blood transfusion service, and they had no capacity to retrieve patients out of there. So it was really a matter of really quite acts of heroism and true dedication, as you mentioned, not just from medical staff, but nursing staff, allied health and hospital service staff.
And even someone from a specialist coming from Bega to pitch in?
Well, that happened on the Saturday, our Saturday in Moruya, where the fire front was approximately 5 kilometres away, and there wouldn't be two hospitals in the state that were so immediately threatened by this terrible fire disaster, and we were separated and may well have been 100 miles from each other. In Moruya, on that day, we had only 3 specialists within the hospital, an accident and emergency specialist whose job was to perform organisation for the hospital for a mass casualty, a general surgeon, an obstetrician and a gynaecologist, and thankfully a volunteer, Dr. Jeff Fletcher, the paediatrician from Bega, who came up. There was a backup of several highly skilled general practitioners, but we had no intensive care, we had no specialist anaesthetist, we had no orthopaedic surgeon, we had no physician cover, and once again we had no capacity for retrieval, either due to road closure or due to the weather events.
So what if that mass casualty situation had eventuated to the extent you feared it might?
Well, everyone had a very anxious days preparing for the worst, but we hoped for the best because we knew if the worst happened, we would be extremely vulnerable. One critically injured or ill patient occupies the care of several nurses and doctors at any one time. And in a mass casualty situation, you need the ability to have as many doctors, specialists, nurses and infrastructure such as intensive care available. Now, these services are available in Bega and Goulburn, and our area is vulnerable now from fire, from major motor vehicle accidents, from aircraft accidents at our local airport.
And what if the hospital had come under attack from fire? I think you've already touched on this. Was there any evacuation plan, or was that a possibility?
There was the hospital at Moruya was the last point of defence. The plan was that if fire threatened Moruya Hospital, it would be water bombed, which I'm glad it didn't happen, because in the state of the hospital it is, the roof would have fallen in maternity. But that was our last bastion of defence from the fire, and we had some serious decisions to make on humanitarian grounds at that time. Was, can you open a hospital to allow people in for shelter when we need to have it available for trauma and casualty?
Yeah. So you were actively thinking about those difficult decisions, and there must have been other difficult decisions you had to consider too.
Well, our Director of Accident and Emergency is trained and has been trained for mass casualty events. She did a great job in preparing the hospital. The hospital was subdivided into zones according to the triage of the level of illness or capacity, from the walking wounded to the palliative end of care. And we were organised for that, and you had to be prepared for the worst, because it would have been negligent not to be prepared for the worst. We did have visits from the military, who offered support to some degree, but their orders had to come from the top.
Wow, so a number of vulnerabilities exposed by this experience, Dr. Holland. You've taken pen to paper and written to health ministers at a state and federal levels, and other politicians as well. What lessons are you hoping they will take from this? What action are you hoping will proceed?
I hope they listen to what we've been asking for at least in the past 2 years, if not for the past 20 years. This has gone beyond the responsibility of our local member, Andrew Constance, who's done a great job supporting the community. The responsibility for this now rests with the Minister for Health. Now, they're spending $50 million on a car park at Liverpool Hospital and over $3 billion on Sydney hospitals. There's $2 billion in the bushfire relief fund from the federal government, who so far hasn't contributed anything to the local development. So we need our ratification of the level 4 hospital, including intensive care, to be done now and not to be a plan of transition. We need to get the sites determined that is accessible for road and aeromedical retrieval. It is safe from fire and flood, and it has equitable access from the population from basically Milton to Bermagui, and they need to start this year, not by 2023.
Dr. Holland, you're also warning that our community, our entire region, I guess everywhere from Nowra down to the border and out over the Snowies as well, where there have been devastating fires, the physical and mental consequences of this are going to be something that we'll deal with for a generation.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I experienced the aftermath of the Newcastle earthquake in 1989. There were significant physical and mental implications of that natural disaster. The same thing will go on here, and we need physical and mental health support to deal with that. But we hope, and as it does with Australian communities, that there will be growth out of this destruction, both in terms of the health services, but also in terms of education. And our first priority is obviously to provide food, shelter, power directly to the people who have been affected, but we need this long-term plan now in the short term.
And in terms of the immediate medical needs, do you see them being met in the extraordinary circumstances we're facing still, partly on an emergency footing?
Oh, we've had great relief from New South Wales Health, sending doctors and nurses from city hospitals. That's been a relief for the local staff who have worked tirelessly over the past few weeks and deserve some rest and recognition. But the long-term issues, I believe, are preparation for the future because of this evident vulnerability of our system to cope with anything like this, And it may never happen again, but it's not just fires. It is other natural disasters and any major casualty event, let alone what we're doing to people every day by transferring them out of our area because we don't have intensive care and level 4 services.
Wow. Well, hearing these stories, Dr. Holland, I mean, we are facing an extraordinary disaster, but it sounds like it could have been a lot worse there for Batemans Bay and Moruya hospitals. Thanks for...
Well, there were people, all our communities were isolated. Milton was cut off, Batemans Bay was cut off, Moruya was cut off. Unfortunately, Narooma wasn't quite cut off in that, and they have basically the least amount of health services down there and need to access Moruya Hospital in case of emergency.
Well, we'll stay in touch with you on the campaign for that new one Eurobodalla hospital and the impetus this gives for those clinical services. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time, Simon.
Dr. Michael Holland there, Eurobodalla-based obstetrician and gynaecologist.